Tonight, we are going to be talking about the relationship between the book of Daniel in the Old Testament and the book of Revelation, and how those two fit together. So before we jump into the particular passages that are sort of, go together with passages in Revelation, let's just talk about Daniel and what we know and maybe don't know about Daniel as a prophet and the things that occur in the book of Daniel. If you think about Daniel and you think about the book of Daniel, what stories or parts of Daniel come to your mind first? Lion's Den, classic. If you know anything about Daniel, especially if you grew up in the church, it's one of those early stories you hear, right? Daniel and the Lion's Den. What other story that's another supernatural, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Great. So you have several of those.
Daniel, camel knees, because every time you start reading about it, he's on his knees in prayer.
He's on his knees, camel's knees, because he was always praying. Yeah. And we're going to see that tonight as we look at some of these passages, that it's in the midst of that time of prayer that he gets visited by angels and things like that. So very, very cool. But certainly most of us, especially if we've grown up in church, we know about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We know about the Lion's Den. We know those kinds of things. Let me give you a couple of pieces of information you might not know, but that are pertinent to our discussion. Because, what we're talking about tonight are the parts of Daniel that particularly relate to our discussion of Revelation and how they fit together. Daniel was written, around the 6th century BC, and of course Revelation was written 95, so you've got a good at least 600 years between the time Daniel was written and the time Revelation was written. Daniel written to a very specific audience and addressed to whom? Most of it was addressed to whom? Gentiles. Okay? The nations. I mean, if you think about the middle section of the book of Daniel, what you'll find is that it's about the Gentiles, God's work among the Gentiles and among the nations, and prophetic utterances related to the nations. So very interesting. It's a little bit different. But the other thing that you'll see is that when you look at the Hebrew Bible, where is Daniel? Does anyone know? Because when we think about Daniel, who do we think he was? What's the first thing we think? Prophet, right? I mean, that's the first word we sort of associate with him. Well, of course, the Old Testament is split into 3 different parts. What are those 3 parts? Who can tell me? The law,
The beginning,
the prophets, and the writings. Okay? Where's Daniel? In the writings. You know that? Yeah. Okay, and I've got that in your notes, but, bottom line is, if you think about the Old Testament, when we think about the Old Testament, of course it's in the prophetic section of our Old Testament, correct? Yeah, the way that we do it, but in the Hebrew Bible, it's not included. And there are a few reasons, but I just want to share with you that, that might hit you as a little strange, because even Jesus, remember, called Daniel a prophet, right? So here in the Hebrew Old Testament, it's in a whole different section than the other prophets that we would mention, like Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and those guys. It's not in the same area. And there's a reason. Most of the Old Testament prophets, their big deal was to prophesy publicly to Israel. All right? So what you find in Daniel is a little bit different. While there are prophecies related to national Israel, there's a whole section that is, Daniel's there and he's in Babylon, and he wrote Daniel when he was in captivity in Babylon. So he's there in Babylon, and there's a king who has a vision. There's a Gentile king who has a vision. And none of his advisors can tell him what it means. So then this guy comes, well, I know this guy that, he's Jewish, he's from Israel, and he can probably interpret your dream. And guess what? Daniel comes along and interprets the dream. So, again, from a Jewish perspective, that's kind of like, wait a minute, you're going to interpret a Gentile dream. Everybody see how that's a little bit problematic, perhaps? Yeah. Okay? So you have that occurring. You actually have today where there are groups within the followers of the religion of Judaism who say, well, we don't read Daniel. not only do we not read Daniel, we don't read Daniel because anyone who reads Daniel is under a curse. Okay? Think about what you know about what the New Testament says about that. When anyone comes, they have the veil over their eyes, but when they come to Jesus, the veil is lifted, okay? So, here you've got this group within Judaism that says, no, don't you dare read Daniel. Well, why? Number one, they've sort of categorized it as this different category because it's not really the prophets. But again, of course, there's this whole section where he's talking about the Gentile nations. So that's number one problem. Number two problem is, it has some real specific prophecies about what? The Messiah. Okay? The rebuilding of Jerusalem. And the timing of the coming of the Messiah. And guess what? If you happen to believe in the prophecy about the rebuilding of the city, and it's in the same context as the timing of the coming of the Messiah, and you say, yes, that one's true, but that one I'm not going to believe, can you be consistent? You everybody see why you wouldn't want to necessarily include Daniel in your discussion? And we're going to see that tonight. So we'll look at specific texts, but I just want you to hear and understand kind of what the thinking is behind that. Another problem with Daniel, and I think one of the reasons it's not recognized a lot of times for the value that it has, is because it's the only book in the Old Testament that shifts languages. Actually, chapter 1 is written in Hebrew. Chapter 2 through 7 is written in Aramaic. Good, got some scholars in here, all right? So 2 through 7 are written in Aramaic, and then 8 through the end, which is chapter 12 or 13, 12, I think, is the end of Daniel, written in Hebrew again. Can anybody tell me why? Because most of us, including me, for a long time, I knew it's like, oh yeah, Daniel's, that's the only one that has some Aramaic in it, kind of in the middle. But can you tell me why?
That's who he's speaking to.
There you go. Remember, he wrote it from his time in Babylon, and a whole chunk of it, chapters 2 through 7, primarily relate to prophecies concerning the nations, the Gentiles. Okay? And part of that equation is also, he has a Gentile king, the Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar and Darius and those guys, and they're coming to him with their visions, and he's interpreting the vision. Okay? So again, in that context, you could imagine if you're trying to communicate that, and if you're trying to get that word out, that's where you are. You're going to communicate in the language where you find yourself. And the language where he found himself would be Aramaic, which is very closely akin to the language that would have been spoken in Babylon at the time. So you've got that shift after chapter 7, chapter 8 through the end, where he begins to address prophetic things regarding Israel, and what language would you want to communicate in then? Hebrew. Guess what? It switches right into Hebrew. Isn't that interesting? Okay? So audience is king. In this particular context, audience is king. It's a big deal. And what the liberals have done with this, of course, is they say, well, that kind of switching around of languages and including other languages, that just tells you it was written either by a group of people or it was compiled later on. It's not really trustworthy. But wait a minute. Not only is it internally consistent with Revelation, which is important because it's written 600 years, between the writing of those two things, but you've got this thing that functions as a whole with regard to the audience and with regard to what was going on in Daniel's world, and that's huge. That's huge. You've got a Gentile king coming to him and saying, interpret my dream. Interpret my vision. I don't know what to do with this. And so this is Daniel's testimony of, his interpretation, his ability to interpret those dreams. So pretty powerful stuff. All right, is everyone ready to jump in? Okay, let's look at the 4 chapters, and you'll see about the middle of page 1 of the notes that it's really chapter 2, chapter 7, chapter 9, and chapter 12. I've included, I think 2, 7, and 12, or maybe 2, 9, and 12. I think 7 was the one that was really long, if I'm not mistaken, and kind of had to do something a little bit different. Yes, yeah. Okay. I already see a typo error on the second page, but oh well. All right, Daniel chapter 2.
Is that Arabic?
Yeah. Which one was that? Aramaic or Hebrew, right? All right, chapter 2 of Daniel. King Nebuchadnezzar has a vision which troubles him. None of his advisors can help him. So they find out that Daniel can do this, and he's called in, and he gives his interpretation. So, and many of you know this, we've heard this kind of thing, but I just want you to hear it through the ears of last week. Remember, what Pastor James shared last week when we talked about chapter 13. And then take a listen and look at some of the pieces that we're going to hear here. You, O king, are watching. Behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. The image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut without hands. Who's that? Stone was cut without hands. Who can tell me who that is? Jesus. That'd be the right answer. That's often the right answer, isn't it? Jesus. All right. Which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together, became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. The stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the dream. Now we'll tell you the interpretation. Verse 37, You, O king, are a king of God, a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and birds of heaven, he has given them into your hand and has made you ruler over them all. So you are this head of gold. But after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours, and then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. Okay, and we'll stop there for just a second. So again, this head of gold is the kingdom of Babylon, right? Everybody see that? Because he's making that comparison of the king and the kingdom, like we often do. All right? So he says the next one is going to be the one of silver. Can anybody tell me what kingdom or empire that was? The Medo-Persians. Okay, the Medo-Persians were the ones that followed in and kind of overcame and ruled for a certain amount of time. And then a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And who can tell me who that was? Greece. Great. Okay. And then if we go a little bit further in verse 40, and the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. Like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. In other words, it might not be as splendorous or, fabulous as a head of gold, but it's stronger because it's iron. What kingdom do we know after Greece that was the most controlling and brutal, right? The world's ever known, really, in terms of their brutality. They were, ruled by force. So, verse 41, whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But let's stop before we go further. It's already divided, right? I mean, look, where are we talking about? We said the legs were of iron, right? 2 of those. What happened to Rome? Anybody remember historically?
You had Alexander the Great conquered.
Right. Well, okay. Alexander the Great was before. He's Greek. Yeah. So, but in terms of Rome, it became Rome and Constantinople, right? So you had the Western Kingdom and the Eastern Kingdom, 2 legs. Okay, so it was a divided empire for a period of time. And then as time went on, what happened to the Roman Empire? It just splintered and became smaller and smaller little kingdoms until there was just pretty much nothing. Okay? That has led some interpreters to read this and say, see, well, that's already been fulfilled and there's not really any future element to that. Okay? Now, my problem with that is the context. Look at what he says about the stone cut without hands. We'll go on. All right? So, verse 42, and as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. And if you look at the history of Rome and the kingdoms that followed after, the empires that followed after, that's really what you see from that point forward, isn't it? Yeah, historically it fits. But, let's see, verse 43, as you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And the idea is that because there are too many men involved and there are too many kingdoms involved, they just fragment. And if you think about the history that we have seen and studied, what is it? War, violence, overthrow, war, violence, overthrow. Okay? Right. And you might be tempted to say that the United States is an exception. You might be tempted to say that. But think about your history and what you know. Anybody heard of the Civil War? Okay, that's one thing to think about. But the other thing I would ask you to think about, which we might not want to admit, is think about just the wars that we have been involved in outside the United States, where we have been responsible or been a part of war, violence, overthrow. Okay? So, yeah. So I think it's fair to say that this is, moving forward through history, that's what we've seen since, and that's what we continue to see, isn't it? Think about all the wars that are going on at the moment. All right, let's continue. In the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. Now remember, he just said earlier when he gave the dream, when he shared the dream of the king, how he ended it was that this stone cut without hands is going to come and smash them all, and the wind was just going to carry them away. In other words, they'll be completely destroyed. Have we seen that yet? Okay, have we seen that yet? The days of these kings, the God of heaven, this is verse 44, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. Never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall be break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it will stand forever. Okay? Haven't yet? No. Okay? So what you see is that he's giving this image and kind of carrying it forward till where that stone cut without hands hits it at the base and just destroys it all. All of it. The kingdoms of men. All right? So, verse 45, inasmuch as you saw that stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. The dream is certain, its interpretation is sure. If that's true, we have a yet future war. We have a yet future judgment, and we have a yet future redemption. We have a yet future kingdom. Okay? So, it's in the same context as three kingdoms that he mentions that came and went. Everybody see that? It's in the same context. He says, these three kingdoms, that's what's going to happen. Well, guess what else? If these three kingdoms came and went, and it's like I said, why would you doubt the end of the game? Why would you doubt the end of the story? Right? All right, so I summarized it here at the end. The head of fine gold, the chest and arms of silver, so I moved that down so you guys can kind of see that in bulleted form. For those of us who are more visual learners, so, all right, hopefully that will help. Okay, the other thing that I want to mention is, there's a lot of focus from people who take away from Revelation and Daniel, a lot of focus on just, God, the grace of God, and that God wants salvation and redemption and the goodness of God and all that. But what I want you to notice is there is the primary focus of the end in this context is what? Judgment and destruction. Judgment and destruction. Okay? So, and what does Daniel mean by the way? Anybody tell me? God is my judge. Write it down. Write it down. If you've Never heard that. It's Daniel. Daniel, my judge. El is from Elohim, so that's God. So God is my judge, or my judge is God. Either way you want to say that. Hopefully that's helpful. But name is often a reflection of the identity of the person. And looking at a lot of this, we see it hold true. All right, that's Daniel 2. Daniel 7 is very closely related, and I want you guys to see how Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 fit together. So you're going to see me do that at the end of the notes, but I just want to tell you that the Daniel 7 piece is very closely related, you're going to see, to what Pastor James shared about chapter 13 last week. So let's look at it together. Starting in verse 2, and I did not include the whole chapter because it's a long chapter, but Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea, and four great beasts came up from the sea. Came up from the sea. Four great beasts came up from the sea. Does that sound familiar to everybody? Okay. So, and that's essentially what we read, right, when we started chapter 13. We'll continue to read. Verse 4. The first was like a lion. And without going into great detail, and I'd love to do that, but we can't really afford to do it in terms of our time frame tonight, every little detail here historically fits the picture. It's very intriguing to do a study of this passage just on its own merit, but like I said, for our purposes, we just want to see lion, bear, leopard, all right? So we'll do that very quickly here. The first was like a lion, verse 5. Suddenly another beast, a second like a bear. And then verse 6, after this I looked, and there was another like a leopard. Okay? So, interesting piece here. Lion, bear, leopard. Now, think about Revelation 13. For those of you who remember kind of Revelation 13 and the flow of Revelation 13, the beasts or the animals that are mentioned related to the beast of the sea, what animals are given? Leopard first, then bear, then lion. Look at what you just read. What's the difference? It's reversed. It's reversed. Anybody have any idea why? Because there is a reason. There always is. There always is, and it's always cool. I would tell you. Does anybody know? All right. You're writing 6th century BC. You're looking forward, right? You're in the Babylonian Empire. You're looking forward historically to the Medo-Persian. Get it?
Yeah.
All right? You're looking forward to the Medo-Persian Empire. You're looking forward to the Greek Empire. All that future. When you come to where John is writing in Revelation, all of that's behind you. Isn't that interesting? Mm-hmm. So he's drawn a timeline backwards. Cool. All right? So, yeah. I mean, even little things like that. Just, why not? Great. Okay. So, and they still represent the same things, of course, and like I said, this section is an interesting study on its own if you have the time. But verse 7, after this, I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge, notice, iron teeth. Iron teeth. So you've got that same word picture, that same idea tied to this beast somehow. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Isn't that cool? All right. I was considering the horns. There was another horn, a little one, coming up among them. Does that sound familiar? Sure does. Okay. Before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots, and there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. I mean, are we reading Daniel or are we reading Revelation 13? I mean, honestly, having read chapter 13 of Revelation, you look at this and go, are you kidding me? Very cool. 600 years or more apart between the two writings. second verse, and this is page 3 of your notes. Second important explanatory verse, verse 17. Those great beasts which are four kings which arise out of the earth. So again, in terms of summation, what you see is it all lines up. The lion is the head of gold. The bear is the chest and arms of silver. The leopard is the belly and thighs of bronze. And I kind of made a joke about the gold, silver, bronze. Anybody seen that somewhere before? Yeah, okay. If you've seen the Olympics, okay. All right. And a fourth beast is this future king or kingdom that is worldwide, and it's not like the others. And that's what he just said. He said it's not like the others. And the whole 10 horns thing and the little horn and all of that, that's all imagery that's, exactly the same as what we see in Revelation. And guess what? It's all yet future. It's all yet future. It's the only way to fit it together. All right. Daniel 9, and you have the whole text here for the section that we're concerned with. And this is about the 70 weeks. And this is one of the sections where Daniel's just praying. And who's he praying for? Anybody tell me from Daniel chapter 9? Praying for his people and for his city. He's praying for his people and he's praying for his city. I just want you to hear that. If you go back and you read the whole first part of Daniel chapter 9, he's praying for his people and he's praying for his city. Who are his people? Israel. And what is his city? Jerusalem. Okay, I just wanted you to hear that because the context is Daniel is on his knees. He's praying. He's I'm praying for my city. We're all guilty. We're all sinful. Pray, Lord, save us, help us. Be merciful. And he's going on and on and on. I'm praying for my city and I'm praying for my people. Start verse 24. 70 weeks. Everybody's heard about the 70 weeks, right? Here we are. 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city. Okay, so remember who he's talking about. To finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. To anoint the most holy. That's very cool. Okay? Have we seen that yet? Okay? Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. 7 weeks and 62 weeks. What's 7 and 62? Somebody do the math. 69, right? Okay? 69 is not 7. I mean, everybody gets that, right? That's obvious to get, but I want you to hear that because look at what he's very specific. There's 7 weeks, and then there's 62 weeks. He still hasn't talked about the 70th one, has he? All right? So just let's take a look at what he says. There shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublesome times. So if we split those periods apart, you've got a 7-week period, you've got a 62-week period, and then you're going to have a 1-week period, all right? So let's go back to the first one. The first one, he says, is 7 weeks, right? And if a week equals a year, in terms of the way that they are drawing the word picture in Daniel, if a week equals a year, how long is this first period? 49 years, all right? So what he says is from the time that it's declared until the end of that first block, Jerusalem's going to be rebuilt. Jerusalem's going to be rebuilt. You're praying for your city and your people. So he's talking about the rebuilding of the city, and he says that's going to happen, during this first week, this first 49-year period. Guess what happened during that time? There was a decree by several of the kings, but Artaxerxes, most notably, who said, yep, I'm declaring that the city can be rebuilt. All right? From the time that was declared until the end of 69 weeks, what kind of a time frame do we have? Enough time that is just about the time, guess who came? A guy named Jesus. Okay? All right? So what you've got is you've got that first 7-week period, first 7 weeks, that first 49-year period where it says, okay, during this period, Jerusalem's going to be rebuilt. And look what he goes on to say. And then after the 62 weeks, this is that second set of weeks, right? And we'll do the math there in a second. But after the second set of weeks, Messiah will be cut off, but not for himself. I mean, think about what he just said. If you're Jewish and you heard that, how would you understand that? Messiah will be cut off, but not for himself. Everybody hear how that'd be tough to hear? I mean, if you're Jewish and you're talking about the Messiah, what are you thinking? He's my king, and what's he going to do? He's going to sit on the throne, and what else is he going to do? He's going to conquer, he's going to wipe out our enemies, and he's going to rule, right? That's what you're thinking. And here Daniel says, look, during that second set of weeks, when it comes to the end of that, Messiah's going to be cut off. What? But not for himself. Does that sound like anything in the New Testament that you've read? I mean, does that sound like it? I mean, could there be any better fit? Can you understand why somebody who didn't want to believe that Jesus was the Messiah wouldn't like this? And wouldn't want to read something like this? Of course. Of course. Because basically what it says is, from the time that first week is ended until, the end of that 69th week, Messiah's going to be cut off, and what else is going to happen? Look at what he says. The people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Anybody remember when that happened? 70 AD. 70 AD. So in that same time frame, 69th week kind of deal. All right? So very, very interesting how closely all of that fits. He says, the end of it shall be with the flood, and until the end of the war, desolations are determined. So think about what you just read in Daniel 2 about just, war, violence, overthrow, and there's just going to be this mess of, governments and fighting, and they're not going to hold together, and they're going to split apart, and they're going to fragment. And what he says is, he said, until the end, guess what? It's going to be like that. It's going to be like that. Okay? So, you might be tempted to just say, well, that's not all that specific, but look at the very next verse. So again, you don't know, the end of the 69th week, but you don't know about this last week. Does everybody see that yet? He hasn't really talked about this last final week. Last verse. Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. For 1 week. Guess which week that is? The 70th week. And that's what this passage is known for, is Daniel's 70th week. Okay? But remember, the context is he's praying for his people and for his holy city. Right at the beginning, he says, 70 weeks for your people and for your holy city. Verse 26, after the 62 weeks, Messiah will be cut off. The people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, the temple. Right? So, then, when is then? The context is not clear. And many, many people will try to tie them together and just say it's just like one straight shot. But notice what he says about it. He'll make a covenant with many for 1 week, which is a 7-year period. In the middle of the week, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. Sound like anything you've read in Revelation? Yeah. Okay. On the wing of abomination shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined, is poured out on the desolate. It's poured out on the desolate. You tie that together with the other passages that you have, and can that be an accomplished event in history? Can it be? No, it cannot. Okay? In terms of a 7-year period where an agreement is made with the people and the city, right? And there are offerings and sacrifices. Have we seen that since 80-70? Have we? No, we haven't. Okay? So what this says is that for that 1 week to take place, specific things have to happen. There has to be a treaty. There has to be an agreement. All right? There has to be a covenant between this beast and the city and the people, who are Israel. Okay? And then in the middle of that week, 3.5 years into it, where does that sound like we are in Revelation? Right about where we are. Yeah? Ringing true to everybody? Yeah, of course. Okay? He says the guy's going to break it, and then he starts talking about desolation. Okay? So all of that sounds very, very true. It rings true, I hope, for everybody here, as far as the way all these pieces fit together. And I did the math for you down near the bottom, but if you look at the very last chunk there on page 3, this passage also helps us clarify elements of tribulation and revelation. It says, well, it's clear that while the Antichrist begins the tribulation with a treaty, he breaks it. He breaks it in the middle of the tribulation. That's what it says. He breaks it. All right? So, all right. And that's the 70th week in Daniel 9. So we'll do Daniel 12, and then we shall be done. But I hope this helps everybody see that everything that we've been studying in Revelation fits together hand in glove so incredibly well, and there's at least a 600-year gap between the writing of these two documents. And yet, not only is that true, when you have like the order of animals, things like that, where they're reversed because of where they are in history, why, how do you just come up with that? Yeah. All right. Daniel 12. Daniel's final prophecy. And you're going to see that it really does repeat many of the ideas that we've already seen. Verse 1, at that time Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. The great prince. What does that tell you? Does that tell anybody anything in here? In terms of Michael's position? What's another archangel? Okay? Again, it's another argument for a hierarchy. It's like kind of like a military thing. There is an angelic hierarchy. And we can argue that from other passages, but we see a pretty strong piece of evidence right here. Verse 1 continued, and there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. Okay? Time of trouble, and this is also called Jacob's trouble in other places, but time of trouble such as there never was since there was a nation. Okay? Has that been experienced yet? No. Okay? And once we start going into the detail, then you end up going, well, wait a minute, none of this has happened yet. This is all yet future, and because it's yet future, it also lines up with all these other pieces that we're seeing all over Revelation and all over all these other Old Testament prophecies that we're going to hopefully have a chance to take a look at. But let's continue. And at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. That sound like Revelation? Yeah, it sure does, doesn't it? All right. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Does that sound like Revelation or what? Sure does, doesn't it? Okay. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Before we go further, let me just say this, okay? And yeah, this is going to be hard for me to say. Think about your life. God put you and me here for a purpose. And we can choose to influence other people around us for good and to point them toward God. And it makes a difference. And it doesn't just make a difference right now. It makes a difference eternally, according to Daniel, who wrote 600 years BC. Okay? So, it's right there. It's right there. Beautiful, huh? All right. All right, I'll recover. Verse 4. But you, Daniel, shut up the words, seal the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. Then I, Daniel, looked, and there stood two others, one on this river bank and the other on that river bank. One said to the man clothed in linen, who was above the waters of the river, how long shall the fulfillment of these wonders be? I heard the man clothed in linen, he who was above the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand to heaven, and swore by him who lives forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and half a time. Man, does that sound familiar or what? Isn't that beautiful? Okay, same thing. And when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, now think with me for a second. Look at what he just said. All right? When the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, the holy people has been completely shattered. What does that mean has yet to happen? Future. During this time, times, and half a time. What does that mean? Tell me. That means there has to be such an intense persecution of the holy people, of the saints. There has to be such an intense persecution that it's almost like they're just about to be wiped out. And we're going to hear in the very next hour that that's one of the things that Jesus said about this same time frame. He says, unless that time was cut short, nobody would end up living. Nobody would survive it, right? So, very cool. When the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all these things shall be finished. All these things shall be finished. Although I didn't understand. I said, my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the end of time, or time of the end. Many shall be purified, made white, and refined, but the wicked shall do wickedly. And none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. Verse 11. From the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335 days. Okay. But you go your way till the end, for you shall rest, and will arise to your inheritance at the end of the days. Okay? So, you're reading this with, you're trying to read this with fresh ears, and yet at the same time you have all this, everybody in the room basically already has this background in Revelation. But how does this confirm what we've seen in Revelation? That there is a second half that's brutal in terms of its persecution of the saints, right? That it's a fixed time, all right? That it's literal and future, just like everything else he's talking about. It's still this literal future thing that's going to be a fixed period of time, and that there's going to be a final resolution. I mean, look at how he ends his book. You shall rest, and you will. That's a promise, guys. That's a promise. And he not only made it to Daniel, he makes it to every one of us who's trusted Christ in our generation. That we will arise to an inheritance. And it's reserved in heaven for us.